3, 4. Let me tell you, PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps, it's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation, so log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Episode 3 of PuckPedia Cap Central. It's myself, Keith Kavanaugh, alongside Hart, Levine, and Hart. I don't know about you, but the main topic for me today is the Devils' last night overtime win over the Blackhawks. Simone Nemec hat trick. I know that's exactly what you're thinking as well.
Yeah, I think that's a you topic.
But still, what a crazy game, and honestly, what a kind of interesting news dumpy kind of Thursday, middle of November, out of nowhere, turned into a lot of good things we can talk about on the show today.
Yeah, definitely. Always news, and nice when there's some signings and some terminations and LTIR activations and things to talk about for us.
Yep, and as always, you guys know this show is presented by our friends over at CoolBet. If you go to PuckPedia.com/CoolBet, you can get in on the action today. Stay cool, bet responsibly, PuckPedia.com/CoolBet. And also, we have our YouTube page. Please go subscribe to it. This is also live on X. We have our weekly PuckPedia hockey show. We just most recently had Chase Prisky on. Episode launched yesterday. Great episode with Chase, who's now playing over in Siberia. You guys might know him from the NHL or from the AHL or from LinkedIn and now the KHL. But Chase Prisky, what a guy, and just what an interview.
Yeah, great. I'm glad we had him on, and it's pretty cool to hear about his experience in Siberia.
Yeah, broken hand right now, so he's out of action for a little bit, but he'll get into it in the near future. But let's hop in today right now. I don't want to waste too many people's times. Let's start off the day with the big news that kind of dumped this morning. It was the Shane Pinto extension with the Ottawa Senators. Shane Pinto signed a 4-year, $7.5 million average annual value deal this morning. Basically, they bought 2 years of UFA with this deal. He has a 10-team no-trade clause in years 3 and 4, which are the UFA years. Louis Gross is his agent, which also, funny enough, was Chase's agent. I think still is Chase's agent. So we got some good stories about Louis and how they think about things and their whole process when having players up for UFA and RFA. In this situation, Shane Pinto was a RFA with ARB rights expiring at the end of this season. He has 14 points in 17 games this year. He makes $3.75 million. The Ottawa Senators have $79.5 million committed for next season with 16 players signed. So a lot of their core intact. Shane Pinto, a big piece of that this year. Hart, what'd you make of the deal? To me, the first thing that struck me was I thought they might get a little bit more term on this given that AAV.
I think this fits in exactly with what we've been. Oh, did we lose my camera?
You're good.
Do you have me?
I got
you. Have me? Okay. To me, this fits in exactly with what we've been looking at and talking about for term lengths. So, we've talked about how with the cap going up, it would be unlikely to see these max term deals. We've still seen a couple, but it makes sense for especially these high-end guys to, or mid-tier guys even, to take shorter term deals and get back to the market with a much higher cap. So a guy like Pinto, he had a pretty good season, 20 goals, 37 points. And I think the negotiation or the discussion was like, where does he land? Does he get to a 30 goal, almost point per game guy? If that's the case, he's closer to 10 million. Or is he settle in like 20 goals, 40, 50 points? And then he's probably more like a $6 or $7 million guy. And I think that's where let's not make that decision. Let's just go 4 years, and whether he outperforms it or underperforms it, at least it's only 4 years, and then he can go back to the market and and see what he can get.
Yeah, and I think for a guy like that, he's clearly their 2C right now with Tim Stützle as the 1C. So I think he's a guy that definitely helps out. Whoa, we got Hart's camera back. That's big
weird
news for the show. There we go. But yeah, I think that was a good deal. I think it was good business. I think the average annual value is about what the market rate is given the rising salary cap and what Shane Pinto brings to the table. I think he's a really good player, and I think he's a guy that Ottawa knew the longer that this kind of played out, I think just the more expensive he would be, and the price always goes up, and today's price isn't tomorrow's price. So I think Ottawa did make the right move of getting him locked down right now.
I think that's going to be our theme is term, right? And so yeah, for me, I'm most interested in the 4 years and the 7.5, and I think that's the trend is like we've talked about this, but guys like a Frank and Nazar, guys that have barely played any NHL games, sure, sign an 8-year deal because there's a lot of risk of what can happen. But once you sort of establish yourself a little bit, you might as well, like players, you might as well take a shorter term deal because it's going to be so much higher when you can come back and do another deal that it really, really has to be worth your while to lock in for like that 6, 7, 8-year term. And for the teams, there's risk in going that long. The cap number is going to be that much higher. And it just seems like it's a comfortable place to settle in to go midterm for both sides.
Yeah, because like you mentioned, like the team, obviously there's risks associated with it. But I think on the player side too, it's interesting because Shane Pinto is going to be 29 years old at the end of this deal. He's still going to be probably in his prime. So it's another time for him to really cash in. And who knows where the salary cap ceiling is going to be at that point. It could be over $130 million in 4 seasons. So we'll see how that all plays out. But I think it's a good deal for both sides. I think Ottawa's going to be happy with the player and the term. And I think the player is going to be happy with the deal as well. So good deal for Shane Pinto. We did actually just get another deal that happened about a half hour before the show started. It's a smaller deal. It's Scott Wedgewood, the 1B, I would say, goaltender in Colorado. So he signed for just a 1-year, $2.5 million deal. So Colorado's crease with Wedgewood and Mackenzie Blackwood now under $8 million for next season, $7.75 million combined between the two goalies. I think that's a nice piece of business from Colorado. Scott Wedgewood's been playing as one of the best goalies, honestly, so far this season, to the point where when Mackenzie Blackwood has come back from injury, he really hasn't taken over the crease. You've seen Wedgewood playing more of the high leverage games right now. And he's honestly a guy who could potentially be in the conversation for Canada's third goaltender the way he's playing right now. And I think he's a guy who has bounced around in the league. He played in New Jersey, he played in Nashville, Dallas, and now Colorado. Like, he's gone up and down through waivers, has never really solidified himself. And you look at the stamp he's putting on this season, he's still relatively young. I think he's maybe 30, 31 years old. And he's a guy who has played really well this year, and he deserved that deal and got a little stability and knows where his home's going to be next season.
I think what's really interesting is, like, I think that's a great deal for Colorado, I should say. And I think what's really interesting is, like, he's foregoing the opportunity to hit the market next summer, and there's a real lack of goalies available. Like, if we just look on our player dashboard here at UFA goalies coming up next year, the top by save percentage, you got Jonathan Quick, who will be 40 next year, and you got Devin Cooley, Matt Murray. Not exactly household names. I mean, in terms of like guys with the track record, there's a Bobrovsky, but most people expect him to resign. Freddie Anderson, but now you're a guy under 900, some injury issues. Again, now older guys like a Cam Talbot. Only one sort of in their prime is a Skinner, a Vanacek, Mrazek. Yeah. So, like, there's really no other options. And so for Wedgewood to forego being potentially like maybe one of the hottest guys out there, I think that's a lot for him to give up. I see that he only gave up 1 year. So again, he's betting that I'm going to have another good season. Now I'll have potentially like 2 or 3 really good years under my belt. Excuse me. And then I can really be poised to hit it big. But it's the market supply and demand. And if he was at the market this coming year, he'd probably be one of the top paid goalies other than Bobrovsky, right? So it's a really good deal for Colorado to get him locked in.
I wonder, to me too, like, the timing is interesting, right? Because he's obviously playing super well right now. And for him to, like, basically take this deal at the current moment, I wonder if there's a thought that's going through his agent and as well as his head where Mackenzie Blackwood's now back and healthy. Maybe he starts taking a majority lion's share of the games in the crease. And maybe this was kind of his only, like, audition per se. But then to your point too, the UFA goalie market is pretty thin next season. I mean, the entire UFA market, if we're being honest, is pretty thin. And so he's probably a guy who could have gotten the open market, like a 3-4 year kind of deal, maybe like Anthony Stolar's, where around $4 to $5 million AAV. And like, you wouldn't bat an eye based off what he's done so far this season. And he's a solid backup, and you're not paying him to be an elite 1A, like a 1 starter, but like maybe a 1A, 1B situation. So great deal for Colorado.
Yeah, you're thinking, if he went to the market this year, maybe his numbers regress a little bit, but you're looking at a 3-year deal all day, and at least in the 3s, if not maybe low 4s. But you look at like his career earnings. I'm looking at his contract history on PuckPedia. His highest annual contract was this year at what he's making this year at $1.5 million, right? So you have to also put yourself in that mentality, like he's going to get 2.5, like that's a pretty big raise, right? Like who wouldn't want to make that big of an increase? And with the only 1 year, I guess he's thinking that if I have another good season, then the following year maybe I'm getting a 4 or 5 year deal, like in the fives, or maybe I prove that I can be a starter, because he's been around a while, but he's only 33. We see goalies now playing longer. So looking at his birthday is August, so he'll start next season at 34. So meaning he'll be a UFA at 35. So at 35, if he has a couple of good seasons, maybe it's still a 3-year deal, but it could be at some real money if he, is above average save percentage, which he looks like he's trending that way.
Right, you look at Markstrom, right? What he just signed a 2x6, and obviously he has a way more body of work than Wedgewood has, but similar age kind of. And then if he puts up numbers that like close to that, you can at least make the argument that maybe it's not 6 million, but it's a close comparable. And depending on where the salary cap is, like maybe 6 million is the comparable because of the cap hit percentage. So I think that all could play a factor, but good deal for Colorado. And just, we love a nice extension, and we like to break this stuff down and just talk about the timing of it too, because like you said, it's interesting with the thin goalie market. Let us keep it moving here, and let's go to another player. Let's go to the Edmonton Oilers. The Edmonton Oilers are interesting this year because they're a team that always seems to kind of struggle a little bit in October and November, but then really pick it up once December, January turns around. They've been to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals, and they have a big player about to be activated from LTIR. It is Zach Hyman. He could be activated as soon as the next hour or two. They play tonight in Columbus. I don't know if they're home or away, but they play Columbus tonight. So if we look at the Edmonton Oilers' current cap picture, so they currently have $1.625 million in LTIR cap space. They have both Zach Hyman and Kasperi Kapanen on LTIR. Once Hyman gets activated, the Oilers will probably need to make a couple of moves in order to be cap compliant to fit Hyman's $5.5 million cap hit under the salary cap threshold. So, Hart, I just want to talk through the roster construction a little bit and maybe walk us through what you expect the moves to be made once Hyman is activated for the Oilers, whether that's sending down a couple guys who are waiver exempt, putting a player on waivers just to be able to fit that number on their salary cap books.
Yeah, so with Hyman on LTIR and with the new rules right now, they have the benefit of him in LTIR of $3.82 million. So by activating him, they will lose $3.82 million of space. We see they have 1.6 million there of current space. So that means they're short 2.2 million. So to activate Hyman, they have to create 2.2 million of space. One of the ways to do it is Isaac Howard, who, rookie, he has a couple goals, but maybe isn't performing how everyone would have hoped early in the season anyways. Because he was not on the roster when they initially went on LTIR, his performance bonuses are actually using up cap space. So instead of him being his 950 cap hit, he's actually taking up 1.6 million of space while they're currently in LTIR. So if they were to send him down, they clear 1.6 million. And we mentioned they need to clear 2.2. So then any other one player would work, whether that's, a guy that needs waivers, but closer to a league minimum, like a Curtis Lazar or Troy Stetcher, or maybe it's a waiver exempt guy like David Tomasic. But if you do Howard, you could do one other player. If they don't do Howard, the most you save by sending a player down is 1.15. So even if they were to waive and send down a Tomasic, that's 1.15. They would need another player at least that high to be able to clear the 2.2. So like if it's not Howard, if it's Tomasic and a Lazar or a Stetcher, that's not enough. So they'd actually need a third player. So that's for them to decide. I think just like looking at that, I mean, to me, the path of least resistance is sending like a Howard and a Tomasic down. Neither need waivers. Both haven't been playing much at all. Tomasic a healthy scratch, so get them some ice time. And then you don't have to put anyone on waivers. Or potentially, maybe they don't want 8 defensemen and kind of only enough healthy forwards to ice the lineup. And so maybe it's a Howard and a Stetcher, for example. So I just think the fact that if they don't go with Howard, it would require either 2 guys with a $1.15 million cap hit or 3 guys. That just looks to me like Howard's the one that's going to be sent down. But I guess you never know. We'll have to see what decisions they make. But the magic number for them is 2.2 million to clear.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like at the beginning of the season, there was both Isaac Howard and Matt Savoy, who were like the two guys on entry level deals who were like up and coming. And it seems like Savoy has kind of really taken a stranglehold on that lineup, whereas, Ike Howard's been sort of up and down. And then to your point too, where it's not just his ELC and his like average annual value, it's his performance bonuses due to the him being on the opening roster. So that's a lot of money. It's not just like whatever his ELC is, which is probably around $900,000. It's
Yeah, it's
actually
not
like,
950. It's 1.6 as AAV if they send him down. Yeah.
right,
So
exactly.
that makes them. I mean, they did that to optimize their LTIR pool, but by not having him on that initial LTIR roster and then calling him up, it did kind of put a target on him that he's the easiest one to send down because it clears by far the most space.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but like the hockey world's a business, right? And you need to be under certain numbers. And if he was playing out of his mind, I think there would be a world where maybe they would look either the trade route would always be an option too, but to put guys on waivers as well. Like if you put someone over 1.15 million, only that amount gets buried under the minors. So it'll be interesting to see how the Oilers kind of handle this situation. But they knew that this was kind of coming, so I'm sure they're prepared. I'm sure they have a bunch of different scenarios of what they want to do, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that's also going to be a jolt to the Oilers lineup because Zach Hyman's a guy who can add that offensive punch, who gets right up to the net front. I think they're missing some of that right now. And he's a guy who scores a lot of close range goals, but he also wins his puck battles. He's a good forechecker, and he'll help, jumpstart hopefully McDavid and Draisaitl and really get things going in Edmonton.
And yeah, and just to finish that off with Howard, like one thing that's interesting. So because he wasn't on the roster when they started LTIR, like we said, he's 1.6. But if Hyman's activated now and then Kapanen gets healthy at some point soon and they leave LTIR, now he's back. They're a non-LTIR team, and then he's just a 950 cap hit. So it's like for him, he actually has a better chance of getting called up again. If he does get sent down, he has a better chance of getting called up again if everyone gets healthy and they get out of LTIR, because then he's back to just being a 950 cap hit. So it's sort of an interesting spot that he's in.
That is an interesting wrinkle. And I guess I have one question based off of that too, with the whole playoff cap hit. So if the Oilers, let's say the Oilers don't exit LTIR during the regular season, but they make it to the playoffs, does Ike Howard's cap hit, would it be 950 or would it be $1.6 million in the playoffs?
It'd be 950, so there's no LTIR in the playoffs, and performance bonuses aren't factored into the playoff cap. So it's all just their base cap hit. So yeah, Howard is a 950 cap hit in the playoffs, regardless of what happens during the season.
Yeah, and I think that's advantageous for him to maybe get some action in the playoffs if the Oilers were to make the playoffs, which everyone assumes they will at this point. So I think that might help him out in terms of being one of the guys on the roster and playing in the playoffs if he keeps
For
his
sure.
game up. But yeah, let's keep it moving here. Let's go to another team in Canada across from west to east, and we got the Toronto Maple Leafs, which. Oh, Toronto Maple Leafs. If you go to puckpedia.com/puckgm, the top 5 players currently being traded on PuckGM are all Toronto Maple Leafs. It seems like Leafs fans want to completely blow up this roster. But one move that is definitely going to be happening right now is David Kampf. As Hart broke earlier this week, David Kampf was technically suspended by the Toronto Maple Leafs when he didn't make the roster out of training camp, was sent down to the Toronto Marlies. No one claimed him on waivers, played a handful of games there, and then left the team as he wanted to mull over his future. The Leafs then suspended him, which meant that they were not incurring his current cap hit of, I believe, around $1.25 million because they buried some of it in the minors, but he had over a $2.4 million cap hit. So now the Leafs are basically placing him on unconditional waivers for the purpose of contract termination. He's a guy who's made over $12.5 million in his career earnings. He's a solid NHL player, 143 points in 536 NHL games, 30 years old, left-handed center, averages around 20 points a season, so not a huge offensive production, but he's over 50% in the faceoff dot. Struggled a little bit last year in his minutes, but can play some penalty kill too. Hart, talk us through like this deal and just like the cap implications of it.
Yeah, so while he's in the minors, he's a $1.25 million buried cap hit. And by terminating it, they free up that cap space. So it's been freed since he stopped playing for them, which I think was about almost 2 weeks ago now. It was on a weekend, so about 10 days ago. So from that point on, they stopped having that $1.25 million buried cap hit. But that was probably like a temporary solution. Now that the contract is going to be terminated, that's permanent, and they'll be out of that 1.25 like for the rest of the season. For David Kampf, that means like he's no longer getting paid that contract. He had, pulling it up here, he had a $1.075 million base salary this year, and next year $2.4 million. So there's $3.4 million or so left on that contract that he's walking away from. The question is, I'm sure that he's not terminating without another deal lined up. And so how much is that? Like if it's $1 million for this year, and maybe he gets $1 million next year too, like he's still leaving some money on the table. And I guess that's the decision. Do I want to be, highly paid and kind of miserable in the minors, I guess, or in the NHL eating, 5-star meals and staying at 5-star hotels and take a bit of a haircut? So it's like he's definitely not walking away from all of that. And I'm certain that with this termination, we'll see a contract for him with someone else soon, but it's definitely going to be a reduction in pay. And we should point out, like, there's often a term called mutual termination. And technically that's not how it works. Technically a player doesn't show up to work, just like any employee doesn't show up to work. They're in breach of their contract, and then the team has grounds to terminate the contract. We normally call it termination because that's typically done in coordination with the player. So we just saw Vitaly Kravtsov in with the Canucks and the minors, right? That's a very typical case. The player's in the minors. He doesn't want to be in the minors. They work it out with the team that, hey, let's do this. I'll not show up today. That gives you grounds. You terminate, and I'm not going to fight it because I want to go. Whereas, like, if a player was showing up in the minors, even if he was unhappy, the team doesn't have grounds to terminate. So that's why it's typical. We refer to it as mutual, because they're coordinating basically that the player is now going to miss a day and let the team terminate and not fight it. In this case with Kampf, he actually did leave, and he's been gone for a while, and he's been suspended for that. So it's an obvious case of a termination. And again, we're kind of calling this one mutual, even though it's technically not, because all Kampf has to do at this point is just go back to work, and they wouldn't be able to terminate him. But he's basically agreeing to not go back and not fighting it and allowing them to terminate.
So, from your perspective, do you not think it was as mutual as some of these other contract terminations? Like, because it sounded like at first the Leafs were totally fine letting him, go back home and mull over his future a bit and like not play these games. But where do you think it like took a turn where it doesn't feel as mutual as maybe we thought it might be?
I think it's mutual in the sense that the Leafs are saying, if you're staying with us, you're going to be in the minors the rest of the year. What do you want to do, pal? That really seems to me like, just from reading the reports of how it looked, because if you thought of other paths this could take, with the Leafs having 1.25 million buried, they would be ahead if they retained 500, 750, even $1 million to get him traded somewhere. And with that retention, if instead of at 2.4, if he was a 1.5 or 1.75 cap it, maybe he'd be more likely maybe a team would be more likely to trade for him. And so, like, that would be an amicable way to deal with this, and a bit of a win-win where the Leafs would save some cap space, but not all of it. They would lose the ability to call him up if there was injuries, of course, but and he would get to move on and not lose any pay. That would be like the most mutual way to deal with this. But assuming the Leafs felt like, hey, if he doesn't want to be in the minors, so like why should we basically be stuck with any of this in terms of a retained cap hit? If we wait him out, he's going to end up terminating. Then again, it's like a breakup that's called mutual, but one person's kind of pushing for the breakup in some ways, right? So you could qualify it however you want. You could tell your friends it was mutual, but we can kind of see what happened. If they really wanted him, they would have called him up and played him in the NHL, or if they wanted him to keep his pay, they could have retained and traded him.
Yeah, and as we talked about last week too, once this whole termination goes through, the Leafs are fully absolved of that cap hit, so $2.4 million completely off their books. And then also on the flip side, David Kampf is available to sign with any team. He becomes a free agent immediately as he passes through waivers, which would happen at 2 p.m. tomorrow, 24 hours from when he got placed this morning, or today rather. So that's kind of the situation there in Toronto. We'll see how it plays out. They had to put, I think Austin Matthews is not playing tonight. Anthony Solars is not playing tonight. They had to call up another goaltender. They might put those guys on IR to open up roster spots, but it doesn't seem like long-term injuries for either for any sort of cap implications.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, hey, a couple more injuries, maybe they could use a David Kampf to call up, but I guess that's no longer an option, right?
No longer an option. Exactly. They did have some extra bodies at forward though, so I think they'll kind of be okay to weather the storm. And it is one of their best players though, so that's unfortunate. Cool. And just to wrap up the episode here, Q&A. Hart, did we have one question from James over in Toronto? I believe you said.
Yeah, about the Leafs picks.
Oh, right. Okay. So the Toronto Maple Leafs have traded their upcoming pick in this year, their first round pick in this year's draft in the Brandon Carlo deal. They have traded their first round pick in next year's draft in the Scott Lawton deal. The question was around the premise of and this is kind of funny, like no one thought that this would even be brought up at the beginning of the season, but because the Leafs pick is top 5 protected for this year in the first round. So if the Leafs were to enter the lottery and get a top 5 pick, the pick would not transfer over to Boston. The Leafs would retain it. What would kind of happen with the Philadelphia pick in the next season?
Yeah, so if this pick does not transfer to Boston this season, then next year it's a little tricky. If next year's pick is not in the top 10, so like 11 or higher, that 2027 pick goes to Philadelphia, and that would give Boston a 2028 unprotected first round pick. Again, back to the original premise, if this pick this year is top 5, it doesn't transfer to Boston and it moves to next year. And now in this case, we're talking if the pick is in the top 10, then actually it's an interesting situation. Toronto has a choice. They can either give that top 10 pick to Philadelphia, and in which case, again, Boston gets the 2028 unprotected, or they can not give that pick to Philadelphia, which gives Philadelphia the 2028 pick, and therefore Boston gets the 2027 pick. So to summarize that, if this pick this year is top 5 and then next year is top 10, Toronto would actually get to pick who gets that top 10 pick, Philly or Boston, and the other team gets the 2028 pick. So that's kind of interesting. Like it almost could be like a bit of an auction. You would think, like if truly they get to that spot where this pick is top 5, next year is top 10. Maybe they could incentivize one of those teams to give them an extra asset to like give them that pick instead of the future unprotected. So it's kind of an interesting situation where the picks have to play off each other. The Philadelphia pick, that trade was first, and that trade is a 2027 first round pick. If top 10, Toronto gets the option to defer to 2028. So then when the Carlo trade happened after, the conditions in that trade have to basically work off of those Philadelphia conditions. So that's where we're at. If this pick is top 5, we could see a lot of dominoes falling in 27 and 28.
And I doubt that the Toronto Maple Leafs will be drafting top 5 this season, but never say never. If you've seen
Never say never.
all the Toronto media right now, like Steve Dangle and crew I saw are calling the Leafs not a playoff team this year. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think it would be World War III if the Toronto Maple Leafs end up top 5 in this year's draft. But to your point too, like if it does end up that Toronto gets a top 5 pick this year and then a top 10 pick the following year, you might see a deal either from Philly or from Boston where Toronto is getting something for quote unquote future considerations. And that basically is the deciding factor. But also, I don't think the Leafs want to necessarily do the Boston Bruins any favors. So I have a feeling that whatever's less advantageous to Boston is the route that they would go in that scenario.
Potentially, I guess. Yeah.
But cool. Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have here for PuckPedia Cap Central. A lot of good stuff here. A couple big extensions, an LTIR activation, and then a contract termination. I think we covered a lot of different avenues of the CBA and the NHL salary cap picture today. But thanks to our friends at CoolBet for sponsoring this show. And as always, type into the chat. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube page. And we're doing this every Thursday live, in addition to our PuckPedia weekly hockey show that comes out every Wednesday with a new person that we're interviewing in the hockey space. So thanks for following along, and everyone have a good night.
PuckPedia.com